What if building a billion-dollar empire wasn't a formula for success, but instead a formula for failure? Most entrepreneurs are terrified of failing. They see it as a doom and gloom scenario, a dead end, or a sign that they just don't have what it takes. But the most iconic innovators didn't just tolerate failure, they actively sought it out. They used it, they studied it, and they built their fortunes on the ruins of their own catastrophic mistakes. This is the story of how Henry Ford's early business collapses, public humiliations, and investor clashes weren't just bumps in the road. They were actually the very blueprint for an automotive revolution that Ford was on the front lines of. He didn't just get lucky on his third try. He actually developed a systematic process for analyzing his mistakes, a process that I'm calling the billion-dollar failure formula. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how to apply it to your own life. Our story begins not with the triumphant roar of a Ford engine, but with the quiet, humiliating collapse of one man's dream. It's 1899, and Henry Ford, a gifted engineer, convinces a group of Detroit's wealthiest businessmen to invest in his first venture, the Detroit Automobile Company. They were captivated by his talent. While Ford had a budding idea to one day build cars for the masses, his immediate focus was simply on building a viable automobile. The investors put up a staggering amount of cash for that time, and Ford got to work. But there was a bit of a problem. The investors wanted a quick return. They saw shiny, expensive toys that they could sell to their wealthy friends. Ford, however, was an obsessive perfectionist. He refused to push a car out the door until he was satisfied, relentlessly tweaking the design. Months turned into a year, and these investors, they started to panic. They saw a man burning through their money with almost nothing to show for it, but endless tinkering. The few vehicles that did emerge from his shop, such as a delivery truck, were too heavy and too difficult to build. The real issue was this sort of fundamental conflict. The investors were driven by quantity of profit, while Ford was driven by quality of product. In early 1901, after about 18 months of this back and forth, the Detroit Automobile Company was dissolved. The investors lost a fortune. It was reported that they lost a total of $86,000 or $3.2 million today. At 37 years old, Henry Ford was by all accounts a failure. Now, this is where most people would have given up. But for Ford, this collapse was simply the first data point in his formula. The first ingredient he identified was vision alignment. His company didn't just fail because the car wasn't ready. It failed because he and his backers were building two completely different companies. They wanted a boutique shop for quick cash, and he wanted to engineer a revolution. It's a mistake that countless entrepreneurs still make. They take money from anyone willing to offer it, not realizing the misaligned investors will always sabotage a long-term vision for short-term gains. Ford learned this the hard way. His first business failure wasn't just technical, it was accidentally strategic. He now knew that to succeed, the money that he took had to serve the vision, not the other way around. He needed partners who saw the world the same way that he did. So, armed with this new insight, Ford knew that he had to rebuild his reputation. Back then, the fastest way to do that was to build a fast car. So he poured his energy into creating a 26 horsepower racer called Sweepstakes. In October of 1901, he challenged this guy named Alexander Winton, the most famous driver in America at the time. He challenged him to a race, and against all odds, Ford won, which was helped by the fact that Winton's car started having mechanical trouble near the end of this race. This victory was obviously electrifying. Suddenly, some of the investors who had lost faith in him started to believe in his vision again. Just a month later, they formed a new company. This company was called the Henry Ford Company. Ford was named chief engineer, and it seemed like his second chance had arrived. But the ghosts of his failure were still lingering. The investors were still anxious for a feasible commercial product, and while Ford had a vision for a passenger car, he also had this racing fever, and he kept tinkering with another giant racer. Frustrated, the investors did exactly what panicked investors do. they tried to take control of the situation. In early 1902, they brought in an outside consultant, a brilliant engineer named Henry Leland, and his job was to supervise Ford. For Ford, this was the ultimate betrayal and the ultimate insult. He refused to take orders from anyone. In March of 1902, after just a few months with the new company, Henry Ford walked away with around $900 and the blueprint for his race car. He was out, and they even took his name off the door. And in a final crushing irony, Henry Leland actually took over, brought in his own engine, and rebranded the company. This company became the Cadillac Automobile Company. Ford had failed so spectacularly that he accidentally created one of his greatest rivals and competitors in the car market. So the second failure was even more painful, but it gave him the second ingredient for his formula: the necessity of control. Vision alignment wasn't enough. Even with backers who believed in his talent, their fear could lead them to a panic and interfere. Ford realized that to execute a truly radical vision, he needed to be in the driver's seat, not just as the head engineer, but as the undisputed leader of this company that was being built. He had now learned two brutal but invaluable lessons. He needed investors who shared his dream of a car for the great multitude, and he needed a company structure that gave him the final say to see it through. These weren't just bitter experiences, they were the principles that he would build his empire on. Now, moving forward, between 1902 and 1903, something pretty critical happened. Ford wasn't just licking his wounds, he was analyzing the data from his two flameouts. He systematically reviewed what went wrong. His manufacturing was too slow, his designs were too complex, and investor conflicts would kill any great idea that he had. This was the moment the billion-dollar failure formula was truly forged. It wasn't about just having a great idea, it was about creating the conditions for a great idea to actually survive. He found a new partner, a coal magnate named Alexander Malcolmson, who shared his vision and was willing to take a risk. This time, Ford laid it out how he wanted it to go down. He would have control. Malcolmson agreed. On June 16, 1903, the Ford Motor Company was born. This was his third shot, but this time he wasn't just building a car, he was building a new kind of company, founded on the lessons from his past failures. This new company was different. The story goes that after an initial infusion of cash, the bank account dwindled to a terrifying $223. But then the first car sold, and then another and another. With the lessons from his failures as his guide, Ford was now obsessed with efficiency. He analyzed every step of the production of the cars that they were building. In 1908, he introduced his masterpiece, the now famous Model T. This was the car he had always dreamed of building. It was simple, durable, and affordable. But he didn't stop with the Model T. He and his team spent the next 5 years relentlessly refining the manufacturing process to drive the price down even further. This led directly to his masterstroke in 1913, the moving assembly line, which is something that his competitors have all copied and taken into their own processes. The innovation was so profound that it slashed the build time of the Model T from over 12 hours to just 90 minutes. The result was pretty revolutionary for the time. The Model T wasn't just a car, it was the physical proof of his hard-won formula. Because he had aligned investors and total control, he could reinvest profits into making the car cheaper and better, dramatically dropping the price over its lifetime. He transformed the automobile from a luxury for the few into a tool for everybody. His failures weren't obstacles to his success, they were the very foundation of it. The billion-dollar failure formula didn't die with Henry Ford. It's a timeless blueprint. Just look at Steve Jobs. He was famously fired from Apple in 1985, which was a humiliating public failure. But that experience out in the wilderness taught him a few crucial lessons. When he returned to a nearly bankrupt Apple in 1997, he didn't just bring new product ideas, he brought a new structure. He simplified the bloated product line, and he established absolute creative control to ensure a singular, focused vision. His first failure clearly informed the focus that led to the iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Then think of James Dyson, who famously claims that he built 5,127 failed prototypes before creating his revolutionary vacuum cleaner. Each failure wasn't a dead end. It was a data point that taught him what not to do next. Then there's the legend of Colonel Sanders. The story goes that his secret recipe for KFC was rejected 1,000 times. He was in his 60s with a string of failed businesses behind him when KFC finally took off. What unites all of these stories is the deliberate analysis of failure. They didn't just persist, they learned. The fear of failure stops so many of us before we even begin. But as these stories show, it's not the failure that defines you, it's what you do with the data it provides. If you're an entrepreneur, or you just want to be, embracing that mindset is the most powerful thing that you can do for yourself. For more stories that break down the strategies behind the world's greatest successes, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And I've got a question for you as well. What is a failure that you've experienced that taught you some kind of invaluable lesson? Share your story down in the comments for me. I would genuinely love to read it. The $1 billion failure formula isn't complicated, but it is profound. First, analyze every setback to find the real lesson. Second, use that lesson to structure your foundations, whether it's investors, a vision, or your control over the project that you're working on. And third, adapt your strategy using the failure as a compass pointing toward a better path. Henry Ford's 2 major business collapses weren't detours. They were the curriculum for his success. They taught him everything he needed to know to build a company that would change the world. As the famous quote attributed to him goes, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Stop fearing failure, start using it.